Tired of suffering at the hands of bullies, a weak kid starts training with a boxing champion in order to get revenge. Today we're going to recap the story of the 2018 movie, Bully. On his first day of high school, Jimmy is picking up some things from his locker when a trio of bullies walk by and the leader knocks over his books on purpose. Confused, Jimmy looks at the three of them and Miles begins to confront him, asking if he's going to do anything while insulting him for being overweight. As the young man keeps quiet, Miles says he won't waste time with him and continues walking down the corridor, picking on several other students along the way. After the trio leaves, Andy and Bobby, Jimmy's best friends, show up and start talking about how the bullies are. After school, Jimmy goes home to find his mother about to go to work. Despite feeling upset by what has happened, the young man decides not to say anything about it and goes straight to his room, where he makes a video call with his friends who try to cheer him up. Realizing how much he's feeling, Andy invites his friend over to his house to spend some time playing and Jimmy refuses, saying he's going to spend the rest of the day in bed. After the video call, the young man lies down all day and only gets up to go to school the next morning. As he is arriving at school, Jimmy is surprised by his friends who decide to accompany him to the entrance. When they're almost there, Bobby sees Miles and Neil approaching and decides to run away, leaving his friends alone to deal with the bullies. Wanting to get some money, Miles tells Andy to leave and tries to extort Jimmy, charging him $100 to leave him alone. While trying to get him to give him the money, Miles realizes that a student called Vinny is watching everything and decides to just leave, saying that they'll talk again later. Even though he was scared out of his wits, Jimmy went into the classroom where Neil began to make jokes about Bobby, as well as squeezing his chest, causing the young man to scream and leave the class feeling humiliated. When the break bell rings, Jimmy finds Bobby crying in the hallway and does everything he can to cheer up his friend by offering to buy lunch. In the cafeteria, Andy notices that a girl has her eye on Jimmy and tells him that it's Adrian, an economics classmate. While the two of them stare at each other, Miles approaches the group and demands the $100 again, saying that Jimmy owes him. Even though he's scared, the young man says he doesn't owe him anything and won't pay a penny, which makes Miles furious when he's confronted. Realizing where things are going, another student decides to interfere and asks Miles to leave Jimmy alone, saying that he doesn't want anyone to get hurt. Thinking that this student won't do anything either, the bully tells the guy to shut up, saying that if he doesn't do it, he's the one who'll get hurt, but that was a big mistake. Realizing that the atmosphere is getting tense, this student calls out to his cousin who is over 2 meters tall and says that Miles had better leave while he can still walk, making the bully back off for fear of a possible fight. After he leaves, Jimmy asks if the big man wants to be his security guard and the young man replies that he knows he doesn't have any money, then leaves. After going through yet another humiliation, Jimmy starts walking home when, halfway there, he is met by Miles and Eddie, who park their car in front of him and charge him the $100, saying that now there is no one to defend him. Jimmy insists that he doesn't owe anyone anything and Miles refuses to accept this, knocking him down with a punch. Not satisfied, the man starts kicking Jimmy, who is lying down, until one of the neighbors realizes what is happening and decides to intervene. Seeing the old man leaving the house, Miles starts insulting him and runs back to his car, fleeing as the old man approaches to help Jimmy. Looking closer, the neighbor sees that the young man has a cut on his eyebrow and offers to help treat the wound, saying that he has a lot of experience with this type of injury. Once in his garage, the man introduces himself as Mr. Jackson and Jimmy sees a picture of a fighter on the wall, discovering that his neighbor was once a great professional boxer known as Action Jackson. After bandaging the wound, the retired wrestler says that Jimmy needs to learn to defend himself and the young man replies that he'll only be a punching bag. Action replies that he already is and says that if he wants to learn to fight, he can recommend a great teacher to teach him, but only if his parents allow it. Excited by the idea, Jimmy asks for a ride and Mr. Jackson takes him home, telling the young man's parents what happened. After narrating everything, Action talks about the importance of self-defense and offers to help him with it, but despite thanking him for what he has done for their son, Jimmy's parents reply that they can resolve the situation themselves and refuse the offer, leaving Mr. Jackson with no choice but to leave. But that's only until next afternoon. Suddenly, Jimmy's parents show up at Action's door with the young man even more bruised than before and ask about the self-defense lessons. To start classes, Action takes the family to the gym of his friend Manny, one of the greatest trainers in the boxing world. After making the introductions, Mr. Jackson tells his friend about the bullies and says that Jimmy needs some lessons, scheduling the first lesson for the next day. The next afternoon, Action takes the young man to the gym and Manny begins his first lesson, explaining a little more about Jimmy's strength advantage due to his overweight. Because of this, Manny says they can skip the weight training and go straight to the practical class, where he explains a little about the most basic parts of boxing, such as the jab and the position of the feet. After spending the whole afternoon training, Jimmy asks for a ride home and asks Action what to do about Miles, because he knows that if he gives him the $100, he'll come back for more money. The man then says that Jimmy needs at least a month to learn how to defend himself and that he needs to find a way to make the time. To do this, Action suggests that the young man lied to Miles by saying that he will give him $200 at the end of the month if he promises to leave him alone for that period. Thinking that this won't work, the next morning Jimmy tries to pretend to be ill so that he can miss school, but his mother realizes that it's a lie and forces her son to go to class. At school, Jimmy starts to collect his belongings from the locker when Miles shows up and charges him the $100 again. Following up on what Action said, Jimmy says he's got a new job and will be paid at the end of the month, promising to pay him $200 if he promises to leave him alone. Thinking it was a fair exchange, Miles accepts the deal and leaves, leaving Jimmy alone for the first time since the beginning of the year. After school, the young man goes back to the gym where he continues his lessons, but he starts to feel unmotivated and doesn't work as hard. Realizing this, Manny asks him to practice on the punching bag and goes to talk to Action, saying that if Jimmy doesn't want to learn boxing, he won't waste his time trying to teach him. After the conversation, Jackson takes the young man home and asks him what's going on, discovering that Jimmy is afraid of spending a month training and still getting beaten up. To motivate him, Action tells him that if he stops training, he will never be able to defend himself and will always be a target for bullies, but that if he keeps practicing, he has the chance to put an end to this situation, as well as being able to train his future son so that he never has to go through this. Still unsure of what to do, Jimmy goes to school the next morning and ends up meeting Miles' trio, who punch Bobby and start insulting him. After the young man leaves, the bully asks Jimmy if the deal is still on and tells him that if he doesn't pay the $200, he'll make him and all his friends regret ever being born. After the trio leave, Jimmy finds Bobby on the stairs and tries to console him. Outraged, the young man says that he or the teachers can't do anything to stop the situation, just wait until Miles gets tired of giving them hell. Determined to change this, Jimmy leaves school and gets on his bike to cycle to the gym, which surprises even Action. After a long ride, Jimmy arrives at the gym and gives his all in training, even knocking Manny out. In order to defend his friends, Jimmy spends the next few days totally focused on boxing and losing weight. After another week of training, Jimmy is in the bathroom with Andy when Miles arrives to collect the money. Feeling that he's not ready yet, the young man tells him that his boss has delayed paying him and says he won't be paid until next week, offering him his entire salary if he waits until then. Out of patience, Miles agrees to wait a little longer and leaves, allowing his friends to have lunch in peace. Back in the cafeteria, Jimmy decides to tell Andy the truth and reveals that he doesn't have the money to pay Miles, as well as saying that he has spent the last few weeks training in boxing so that he can defend himself. Upon hearing the revelation, Andy says she thought he was trying to lose weight to go out with Adrian and Jimmy says he'd love that, but the girl hears the conversation and sits down next to him, saying he needs to ask her out first. The girl then tells him that her friend is having a party on Friday and invites him to join her. Jimmy goes home to change and waits until Adrian comes to pick him up. At the appointed time, the girl arrives with her mother, who takes the two of them to the party venue. After a while together with the other students, the couple decide to go outside and take advantage of the privacy to get to know each other a little more. During the conversation, Adrian says he's noticed that Jimmy has lost weight and asks what his secret is. While they're talking, Eddie, one of Miles' friends, turns up and starts insulting them, forcing Jimmy to take action and confront him. Because of Miles' agreement, the man decides to back down and leaves the two of them alone until Jimmy pays what he owes. Alone, the two enjoy the rest of the party until Adrian's mother arrives to pick them up and take Jimmy home. Before going in, the young man says he can tell her how he's losing weight and asks her to come to his house the next day. The next morning, Jimmy calls Action and asks him to pick him up, saying he's taking someone to watch the training session. When the appointed time arrives, Mr. Jackson picks up the couple and takes them to the gym, where Jimmy reveals that he has lost weight through self-defense training. Once inside the gym, Action introduces the girl to Manny and asks if she wants to train too, as she has never fought. Adrian asks if girls also train in boxing and Manny decides to show a female fighter in action, asking his pupil Rosie to do a round against one of the male fighters. Inside the ring, Rosie demonstrates all her skill and manages to knock out the other student with just one blow, which leaves Adrian amazed at the world of fighting. After Rosie, it's Jimmy's turn to practice and demonstrate all the skills he's acquired in the last month of training. The next morning, Jimmy wakes up to a message from Adrian and decides to go straight to the gym, even though it's his rest day. Seeing his commitment, Manny tells him that they'll be doing a special training session and that today Jimmy will be practicing with someone else, asking him to go and bandage himself up so they can get started. With everything ready, Manny puts the gloves on Jimmy and introduces him to Tequila, an MMA fighter who will show him how a street fight works. In the ring, Tequila talks a little more about how to use the elbows and knees in the fight, and they spend the day training. The next morning, Jimmy wakes up very early and goes straight to school. During the break, he is out walking with Andy when they come across Miles and Neil sitting with another girl. As soon as they see the two, the pair of bullies approach and ask why Jimmy disrespected Eddie during the party, saying that they will only spare him if he hands over the money by the end of the day. Overhearing everything, Adrian asks what's going on and Jimmy says he'll explain later. After the meeting, the young man goes to the bathroom and is relieving himself at the urinal when Vinny shows up to ask if it's true that he's going to face Miles after class. Jimmy then explains that Miles is trying to get money out of him and that he's going to sort it out. Curious, Vinny asks if it's true that he's training with Manny and Jimmy and asks how he knows this, but the young man just replies that it's his duty to know everything that happens and wishes him good luck in the fight, then leaves. Inside one of the bathroom stalls, Eddie is listening to the whole conversation and sends a message to Miles telling him that Jimmy is training with Manny, as well as saying that he won't pay him. Confused, the young man asks who Manny is and Eddie replies that he's the owner of a boxing gym and that Jimmy will probably try to get revenge. Already knowing what he's up to, Miles asks Eddie to call a completely lunatic criminal called Billy, and that's exactly what he does. Still in the bathroom, Eddie calls Billy and asks him to teach Jimmy a lesson, saying he'll pay him $200 if he accepts the job. Hearing the call in the next stall, that other student in the cafeteria goes up to Vinny and tells him the news. In the lockers, Adrian arrives to talk to Jimmy and asks what's going on between him and Miles, discovering that his boyfriend is being extorted and that he's decided to train in boxing to put an end to the situation. He then says that he only told Andy about the training and that somehow Vinny found out. As soon as he hears this, Adrian says that Vinny is the biggest gossip in the school and that the rumor is probably already spreading, so Miles must already know about the training sessions. Even so, Jimmy asks her not to worry and says that he can manage, but the girl is afraid of what might happen and decides to call Manny. Over the phone, the girl tells him everything that's going on and the man says he can't interfere in his students' affairs. To get help, Adrian says that Miles is up to something and that it could be dangerous, but Manny still refuses to interfere and says that Jimmy can be with his friends in difficult times, ending the call shortly afterwards. At the same time, Vinny calls an acquaintance and tells him that there's going to be an event at his school and that he'll need help getting out. When the time comes, all the students go outside and Jimmy confronts his rival, saying he won't give him a penny. Miles then says that he already knows that Jimmy has been training and that he also has a surprise for him, saying that he has passed on the $200 debt to an acquaintance who is coming to collect the money. Without suspecting it, Billy is on his way to school when he is captured by Vinny's friends. As soon as he receives confirmation, the young man tells Miles that Billy isn't going to show up and the bully has no choice but to confront Jimmy. Confident, Miles goes up and knocks his opponent down with a punch, but Jimmy doesn't give up and manages to recover, dodging the bully's blows and hitting a jab that almost knocks him down. Angry, Miles tries to go on the offensive and ends up being knocked down with a second punch. Realizing that he's going to end up getting hit, Neil decides to get involved in the fight and holds Jimmy back so that Miles can beat him up, but Andy refuses to allow this to happen and holds Neil back, allowing Bobby to knock him out with one punch. In the one-on-one, Miles doesn't stand a chance against Jimmy and takes a punch that sends him crashing to the ground with a bloody nose. Refusing to lose, the bully advances on Jimmy and ends up taking a knee right to the lower parts, being finished off with a punch that leaves him unconscious on the ground. When the fight was over, everyone gathered around Jimmy to celebrate the end of the bully's reign of terror. As if being knocked out in front of the whole school wasn't bad enough, people recorded the whole fight and Miles went viral beating up by Jimmy, even ending up on TV in a campaign against bullying. After all these events, Jimmy became a hero at school and can finally live in peace, enjoying high school with Adrian and his friends who also decide to give boxing a try. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.